Hello, so welcome back. Today we have book 36 for you.
Well, I've got to start off a new advertisement for our Year of Magical Learning website that we're launching for people to take their own Year of Magical Learning journey, create your own story, read 52 books in 52 weeks, write 52 reflections, and we'll turn it into a book for you. So take a visit on yourmagicallearning.net. But beyond that, though, back to our actual reason why we're here, is book 36. It is called On Writing. It's a memoir of the craft by the author Stephen King. I assume both of you guys are pretty familiar with Stephen King and a lot of his works, right?
I know of him, I just don't watch his movie from the book that he wrote.
Yes. So the reflection title for today is something interesting I learned that I later learned in Bird by Bird as well, but I learned it first from Stephen King, so I'm going to give him credit for it. Start with the character and a scenario, and then use your imagination. So what I mean by that is around the time that I was about like 3/4 through writing the book, the I Can't Imagine book, that I published about a year ago now. Probably like 6 months ago now, I guess. No, I didn't do any like research or training or like go look for any path, like instruction from another writer. I just had a story to tell and I wanted to tell it. So I just went to town on it. However, as I was getting close to finishing, and I was reading more and more, and I was looking for new stuff to check out, I was like, well, if I'm going to call myself a writer, I should probably start actually studying writing.
How to write.
So I pulled up this book On Writing by Stephen King, and it was kind of like a part memoir. First part of it was about his life, and then the second part was about how he does what he does. And I thought it was a good time for me to start to try to learn that from some of the best. As I wrote in the reflection here, the first big aha I heard from Stephen King on the actual writing process is he hates adverbs, hates them with a passion. I mean, he mentioned it countless times throughout the story, and he was like, you suck as a writer, basically, if you write in adverbs. I barely even know what an adverb is. I had to go Google it. So I hope I don't write in adverbs. Anybody know off the top of their head, adverb?
First thing I did was look it up.
Yeah, no, I didn't even know that it was a thing, but apparently writers don't like other writers to write adverbs. But the real thing that I learned from this whole story was I was kind of blown away. When I first started going through this book with him, I'll ask you guys, what do you think Stephen King's process was? Like, how do you think he writes? I mean, the guy's prolific, right? He writes, just churns out book after book, and these aren't short books either. Some of them are 300, 400, 500 page long books, so like what do you think Stephen King's process is of how he writes book after book after book?
I don't know why my instinct says he does not. He probably starts with either a scene or the ending, and then he works backwards to get there. He doesn't like start front to back.
He's just imaginative. He just writes it. Everything comes to him naturally and writes it out.
And then I'm going to guess too, he probably gets very isolated.
He gets very what?
He's isolated.
Well, yeah, I don't think you can write around. I'd be curious to hear the author that says, yeah, go into the noisiest place you possibly can find.
I'm not like in a cabin, snowy cabin by himself, or I don't know.
No, he writes at his desk at his home every single day. Actually, a part of his memoir, the guy was like a cokehead. I mean, he used to do lines of coke and
maybe that's it.
Yeah, right. He said there was books that he wrote in the 80s or maybe the late 70s into the early 90s, but he doesn't even remember writing any of the book. He just is like, I was so drunk and cooked out of my mind every night. I was like, this is crazy.
I think maybe that's what makes him famous. And once you become famous, it's easier to piggyback on what you've done already.
Yeah, I mean, you hear that time and time again with guys like Eminem. I remember his story when he got addicted to painkillers, and he was like, I couldn't even think about going out on stage without, but that's not how their whole journey started. Anyway, long story short, what I was blown away by to learn about his process, Blake, I was kind of with you a little bit more in line of, I feel like he had some sort of a plot in mind, maybe an ending or maybe some story framework that he was like, look, this person's going to go to here and do this. And then these people this is the big climax. And then I'm going to have an ending that's going to look like this or something like that. Like some through line plot, that he had in mind, that he was just really imaginative and, thought of these crazy scenarios. Well, what it turns out was he doesn't do any of that. He actually has no plot. He starts with no plot most of the time. He just has a character. He thinks of like, who True is, right? And he's like, I'm going to invent True in my mind. What is this guy's life? What does he do? And then he just gives him a scenario and then he lets it play from there. That's it. So like the movie or the book Carrie, the one with the girl that's the prom queen that gets the blood poured on her and stuff like that. Like he just thinks of that character, Carrie, and he's like, she's in a high school. That's it. And then he's like, I just let my imagination take it from there. And he's like, that's the beauty of it. It's like he doesn't even know what he's writing. So like his readers and his audience doesn't know what they're going to get because he didn't even know it as he was writing it. It was kind of unfolding every single day as he sat down to write at his computer, and he just used his imagination. For some reason, that was a revelation to me at that time, because I've never been a fiction writer. Obviously, I've never tried that before in my life. I guess it makes sense, really, when you think about it. I mean, it's not much different than like an actor, and doing like method acting of, who is, so and so character, like, what are they, how did I got to get in their mindset, all that other stuff. And anyway, long story short, to tie it back into values and purpose, I thought it was very on par with what life is all about. We're just kind of characters given scenarios every single day, and got to use our imagination how we get through it. And it's kind of up to you what story you want to tell. Love to get your guys' thoughts.
Well, that surprises me.
What? Oh, that's how he writes.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that being an interesting way to write. I think coming up with like a character person and then just kind of running with it. How you can make a good story that all makes sense, with not just starting with a character, I think is pretty. You must be pretty skilled at, I couldn't do that very well. I feel like mine would be all over the place and it wouldn't, be tied together. So, but I do think that's a cool idea, just to be like, I sometimes do it. I see someone, I'm like, I wonder what their life is like when they're at home, like by themselves. What's a day like in their shoes? So, but not what I expected.
Yeah, the idea of life is always a story, and we can kind of make whatever we want to make out of it. Love to get your guys' thoughts on how you feel like that applies to yourself. Are you just the Blake character? Are you just the true character? And is there some process? Everybody always talks about the process. You got to go to college, get a job, get promoted, do all this other stuff. Like, you have a great life, have a couple kids, go buy a house, whatever it may be. But knowing that the greatest writers of all time and the people that are the best storytellers of all time, and, tapping into the human emotion, like, what does that mean to you guys, I guess, in terms of how you would apply that to your own life?
Well, I think process can be good. I think it's not saying this is the process that the world, everyone is telling me to do and necessarily following that. I think it's coming up with your own process. I think there's a balance between just winging it and having processes and structure and kind of creating what it is, what your own is and what you want and how you want to get there.
What do you got, Drew?
So I want to comment on what Blake said real quick. I disagree with what he said. If he were to start doing it, he would be all over the place. I disagree with that statement. With me personally, understanding how the mind works, and that's my areas of interest, I think because we have a mind that's been passed down for millions of years, we have a very good ability to detect patterns and see similarities. And so when you create a character in your own mind, you're going to make it so it makes sense. It will make sense because your mind is in tune for patterns. It's patterns recognition. That's what we're good at. And so I think regardless of what you can come up with, whatever you do, it's not going to defy the laws of physics or anything like that. It won't be, just because you're going to have to picture a character in a place and what he or she does. To me, it will be logical because they're going to be a pattern, because that's what our minds does. So I disagree with you that I think if you do it, it may not be as elaborate as Stephen King would be, but whatever you produce is still be logical.
That's
right. And so the second point I want to make is, if you live to a point where you say, well, I have to do this, I have to do that, it has to be completely thought out or laid out, then essentially you're just being a cog in the wheel, right? You just follow the same thing everybody told you have to be. You say, hey, you're not a writer, Chris. You're just a salesperson, or you're a tech person, True, or whatever. You've been put into a certain things that you are basically told to be that thing, and you morph yourself to that. But if you say to yourself that, hey, I let things gravitate towards the values that I enjoy, the activities and the connections of the people that I want to be around me, I think you're going to gravitate towards the thing that you are made to be. Like I said before, a beaver must dam, right? A writer must write, a painter must paint. And so if you allow yourself to gravitate to say, okay, I am True, or I'm Chris, or I'm Blake, let it gravitate to wherever I need to be happy. I think it will gravitate by itself if you don't hold on to that rein of pulling yourself back to fit into the round peg of society, or whatever it is that you call that. It's just because it is conditioning of society. It's putting you into a shape that is not compatible with your being. And so I think it's important to realize that if you want to be happy, let be what may be.
I think it's really interesting when we're talking about, and I think too, it's like interesting when you think about a writer, I think a lot of like kind of plots and stories and how things played out. It's kind of like you see kind of the same thing over with different characters. It's like there's only so many kind of, oh, this person double crossed this person, or oh, this person really, the best friend was really the murderer. Or
Right.
I think to be able to come up with ideas outside of that that's imagination. And then also when you talked about, doing things that's not what society tells you to do, I think you're supposed to go to college, you're supposed to get married, you're supposed to do this. And it's passed down a lot of times through family and ways of thinking, like being able to sometimes look at that and say, maybe there's a different path that I can go that fits me and what I want to do. People are going to give you probably your family pushback maybe, but I think it's important to explore those things. Sometimes you got to break certain habits and trends in order to evolve.
Right. You can't be pushing it towards something that is predetermined by someone. So we have to take a step back and say, well, is this what I want? And use our happiness as a gauge and say, okay, is this the direction I want to be in? For some other people, it's not. To say, hey, everybody should be drinking and partying every night to have a life before it all is gone. Well, that's their opinion. It's not universal truth. And so that's something we have to make sure that we ask ourselves, is this what we want? And is this going to make me happy? Do I like these activities or I don't?
I think that stepping back and taking an analysis and actually analyzing it and saying, wait a minute, I'm going to look at what I'm doing. And I'm going to look at, I think it's difficult, I think, to do and say, see some areas where you're like, maybe this isn't the best. Maybe I should be doing something differently. Maybe I've been doing this pattern over and over again, or something needs to change. I think to be able to step back and look at yourself and analyze that, I think it really takes some openness, some vulnerability to look at that and say, yeah, is this what I want to be doing? Is this what makes me happy? Is this the right thing?
We have to look at it from an objective point of view to get a real readings on the heading, because if we become so attached to some method or side of whatever that we're being told, we don't think about the logic of it. We say, well, I believe in this, so I always believe in it. If you don't think objectively, then you're always going to be blinded by what you don't want to see.
Did we get sidetracked, Chris?
What's that?
Did you go on a tangent there?
No, not at all. Actually, I think you guys make great points. It always goes back to your values and knowing yourself first and foremost. Like if you're going to be Stephen King and you're going to do Carrie, you got to know what Carrie cares about. You got to know who Carrie is, and to know who Carrie is, you got to know what Carrie values. So to write the scenarios, how Carrie's going to do what she's going to do, you got to know what's important to that person, like deep at their core. And I think that goes for everybody, whether you're a character in a story or whether you're a character in your own life. It's really, to your exact point of stepping back and evaluating everything, there's no rhyme or reason as to why all three of us are on this call right now today talking about this book and doing the Year Magical Learning stuff, right? Like that came from values, and that came from evaluating your life and doing what you say you want to do. I don't know what's going to be next in my own personal journey, but I know where I'm going to go look to my values and figure out what's the next activity that expresses that. And then it'll make sense to me. It won't make sense to somebody else, and they won't know what's coming next, but it'll make sense to me at the end of the day when I look back on it. Chris values learning. He values challenging himself. He values all this other stuff. And you're going to go, oh yeah, I should have seen that coming, but I didn't see that coming. No,
And no one does, right? To me, honestly, most people don't know. And if they tell you they do, they're lying. Because like what we do up to today, it's like, well, we don't know. We're just doing things we like to do. And eventually it becomes this and that and the other. It's just the way it works. So you have to let it, I guess,
let the story unfold. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Chris, let me ask you, when you talked about kind of what you want to always do next and you don't know what it's going to be, but you go back to your values, do you feel like, I feel like that is to stop and think about that, I think is not something people regularly do. You might do it, here and there. Does it second nature? Is that what you always do right now? Do you feel like you've done that long enough that or is it something you still have to like consciously really take the time to stop, think about that, and to decide what you do next?
No, I have to consciously do it every single day. Like it's a part of the writing and reflection process. It's a part of, this is what the Year of Magical Learning is. It's having this conversation and remembering, like, Oh yeah, this is why values are so important. And I need to make sure that I always am seeing them and looking at them, understanding them, evaluating, do they apply to what I'm doing in my life or not? You know, like, I mean, this is an ongoing, forever evolving process. Stephen King, and just like yourself, you don't wake up every single day going, oh yeah, I know what my plot's going to be. I'm going to die when I'm 85 years old with, 7 grandkids and, 3 children and couple properties and happy wife next to me. Like, I don't know what the hell's going to happen with my life. Nobody can predict the ending of the plot and the climaxes throughout the course of your life. So I say, to your exact question, yeah, for sure, you're evaluating constantly, right? I mean, that's how you have to do it. Like, Stephen King can't sit down and write every single day about Carrie without making sure and checking with what he's about to write in his mind has any correlation to what she cares about. Any final thoughts, guys?
Let the story unfold.
Exactly. So the question for everybody, what would happen if you stopped following the process and started using your imagination and living your values, everything you do? So
you might like your life.
it certainly makes it more fun. You never know what's coming next. Awesome. All right, good discussion, fellas, and we will see you all tomorrow.
Sounds good. See ya.